Hello and welcome to Code Harvest. This is part 4 of our step-by-step tutorial video on how to create a product page for an e-commerce website using HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, where we also include UI designs such as sliders, animations, and so on. This e-commerce specifically sells electronics and the company name we created is called eLife. Due to how long the full tutorial is, we have separated it into different videos and parts. So this is part 4 of the product page tutorial. Check out the full playlist in the description and the top comment down below. Now we also created a tutorial for the home page of the website, so the link to that video is in the description down below as well. So subscribe to Code Harvest, and now let's get started. So now we're going to create a comment first, and we're going to call this product cards / slideshow. So in here we're going to create another div. We'll put it back in small caps, and we'll create a class which we will call product section. And because we're making a class because we're going to use this section multiple times for all the categories. So first we're going to start with creating basically a line of items that we're going to display. Different items for all. For headphones, it's going to be only headphones, smartwatch, and the same for the rest. So we're going to create a class called product section. So the first one will be called all, and we want to create an ID as well, which we'll be using for JavaScript, and we're going to call it product section all. Now, it's also useful to detect which slideshow. For example, if we clicked on a button, we need to know which section in the button we clicked from, and then we can make changes accordingly. So now let's create another div and a class we will call product section top container. And just like the name suggests, this is the top section of the product section. So this is going to be basically where this appears, or something like this appears. So there'll be a blue line, a small heading, there'll be a big title, and there'll also be 2 buttons going left, and one for going left and one for going right. So that would be the whole top section, and then the bottom section would be where the slideshow and the product cards will be displayed. So this section will be divided into 2 sections. So the first one, we'll call it section category container. So let's create a class. So what we want to do is create basically the exact same thing, the blue line and the title. So we're going to use the same class elements that we used, the same span elements with the same class name. So the first one was blue line, and we do not add any text. And the second one, which we also added for the category section, is section category text. So we'll create the class, and for the heading we're going to call it all electronics. So the name of the section is called all electronics. Now another thing is we actually want to create another heading, but it needs to be in the next line after the categories heading. So we'll create a new class over here, and we'll call it a div, in which its class name will be section category type. Alright, so this is where the category type will be stored in, and inside the category container we're going to create a heading, and we're going to call it, and the text will be explore best sellers. So that's the end. We wanted to have a block or a flex layout, but the flex direction should be in a column rather than a row. But however, these 2 elements should be in one line, in one row. Alright, so now we will create another div still inside this top container. This is where the buttons will be in. So this is now the second child element of product section top container, and we're going to create a class name, and we're going to call it slideshow buttons container. Now we will create a data attribute which we will use for JavaScript in order to identify which section the button was clicked from. So if it was from all, or from headphones, or from smartwatch, and what we want to tell them is if the button is clicked from the all section, then it should identify that this team, that the user clicked from the all section, all electronics section. So in order to create this, we can go with, we need to type in data, and then a hyphen, and then we can create the name of the data attribute that we want. It can be any name that we want it to be. So we'll call this something simple like slideshow, and we need to set the value of the data attribute so that it identifies which section it came from, and it came from the all section since we're creating the all section at the moment. And now we'll create another element, and we're going to create the button now. So we're going to create two buttons, the previous one, the one for previous and the one for next. So we'll create a new class and we'll call it slideshow button. But we'll also create, but we'll also use another class within, and we'll call it previous button, so that it identifies that we did not click the next button, but we clicked the previous button. Otherwise, it won't know whether to go backwards or forward. Now we're going to need to include an SVGs, which we will include later on. But first, let's create the second button, and this one will be called next. So here we just included a space in order for the HTML document to identify that there are two classes, one being slideshow button and the second one being previous button. So it is separated by two buttons rather than a dot like in CSS. So just a space, and it will identify that it has two different buttons. Alright, so now let's include the SVG element. So simply we use bootstrap icons. So now let's type in chevron. So there are three different types of arrows. There's the normal arrow, but I feel like it's too basic, whether it be with a circle or without a circle, or if it has two diagonal lines and one straight line. But we just want the two diagonal lines, and we don't want it to be colored, but we want it to be outlined, and it's not really within the arrows section. So we're going to retype this, and there's another name for it, which is called chevron. So we want to get this type of arrow, and we want to design our own circle and choose the circle size that we want. So now we're going to use this tab. So I'll keep it on. So for the left, we're going to keep it in the left in the previous button section, and we're going to change the width and the height to be 22 pixels, so something slightly larger. Now the same thing goes for the right. So we'll copy the right chevron. Alright, so now we've set the width and the height of the SVGs. So now let's take a look, and you can see that our chevrons look like this. However, we're going to be using, actually let's change it to 30 pixels, because 22 seems too small. So now out of the product top section, we're going to hit space 2 times so that we can know that this is another different section of the product section container. So in here we want to create another class, and we'll call it product cards container. So this is where the product cards will be stored in. Now inside the product cards container, we want to create a unordered list element, and then inside we're going to create a list item, and the class name for this list item will be simply product card. So now in here we want to create another div, and we're going to call it, and the product card section will be separated by two. So the image will be on top, and the text, the title, the price, and the button will be at the bottom. So it will be separated by two sections. So for the first class, we'll name it product image container, and for the second section we will call it product text container. So for our image section, we'll just create two elements. The first one being an image, and then we're going to include the source attribute, so where the image is in the file. So for this I've actually created a folder called product page, and inside product page we get to see all of the items, all of the products. So when we click on one of them, we can see all of the products from 1 to 12. So as I said earlier, there are 12 items in this product page. So of course you can add more based on what you're working on. So I went with 12 laptops, 12 mobiles, smartwatches, and tablets and headphones as well. So I think we're going to start with headphones. So we're going to include the source attribute. So first let's include the images folder, the name of the product, the name of the folder the products are in, and then we'll start with headphones, and we'll go with 0, 1, so the first one, .png. Now the next thing is we need to include the attribute, and for this we'll call it maybe headphones, and that's it. Now the second thing we're going to add is a button. So this button will be the heart button, where a user is able to click on the, when the user clicks on the button, it basically adds an item to their wish list. So we need to include an SVG, but first let's create the class name for it, and we'll call it heart button. So we're going to go back to Bootstrap, and now we're going to search for the heart button. But I feel like this heart, it doesn't feel like a proper heart, doesn't feel too deep, especially the top part. So we're going to use a different website. Alright, so now I'm going to head into the Google browser, and what we want to search for is SVG logo. So this is another great SVG icon finder, so you can actually collect other icons for free, just like in Bootstrap. But as I said earlier, the heart in Bootstrap looks too round, and we want something that looks like a proper heart. So we found this one, and when we edit vector, we click on edit vector, and then we have the option of copying the SVG, then we can paste it in our heart button class. Alright, so it seems like the width and the height has not been set. So now let's set the width and height over here, and we'll set it to 22 pixels wide and 22 pixels tall. Right, so now we can see the heart, and we just need to change the color and its positioning. So we're going to head over to CSS file, and now let's create a comment, because this is now another section of the web page. So we're going to call this products section, and now over here we're going to start by the first class that we created of this section, which is product section over here. Since it is a class, we selected with a dot, and since this is just the container itself of the section, all we want to do is to make sure that the whole section is leaning towards the center, because the width will not be 100%, so we just want the whole all of the elements to be centered horizontally, so we use text align. And of course we want some spacing between the container and this section that we're making and the section above. So we'll add margin top, and we'll set it to 80 pixels. So now you can see it moved down slightly. So now we're going to work on the second class, which is product section top container. Since it is a class, once again we'll use a dot in order to select it. And what we want to do is, so the container is responsible for two main child elements. Since it is the top container, but it is responsible for the title and the design, the blue line, and it is also responsible for holding the two buttons that allows you to go to a previous slide of products or the next slide of products. So we're going to use a flexible layout, and since they're all going to be in one line, we need to keep the direction to be, we need to set the flex direction to be in a row. Another thing is we want to make sure that there is space between, so we want the first element to be on the furthest left and the second element to be on the furthest right, so we can achieve that with space between. And then we want our elements to be placed towards the center, vertically. And then we want our elements to be vertically centered, because usually it is always on the top of a container, but we want it to be at the center. Now when we check our HTML page, we can see that section category is next. So this is the first element of the top container, which is responsible for the heading and the title. And since it is also a class, we'll use a dot in order to select it. And all we need to do is basically set the layout to be in one block. So we can either use block in order to set it in one column, or we could use display flex. Obviously, using display flex alone will not change it into one column, but we need to change the flex direction to be in a column, and now it is in one column. So it depends on you and what you choose. I feel like since block uses only one line and we don't really necessarily need a flexible layout, we can stick with block. Now, the next thing we have is the type. So the type of section, so for example, whether it be all electronics, electronics, smartwatch, headphones, etc. So we're going to edit that section now. And what we want to do is we want to make sure that it stays vertically centered. So we need to use the flexible layout and then use place items in order to set it vertically centered. And now we have the blue line. So for the blue line, we already designed it on top over here. So we already said how we wanted our blue line to look like. And so now we can see that our blue line appears after designing our container. Alright, so now, and we also set up the section category text before, which before was holding categories. So now we're using it for the name of the section, which is all electronics. So now we can move on to designing the heading. So for our heading, we need to select the container that it is in. So we go with the parent element of the element, which is section category container. And since it is also class, we're going to select it with a dot and select the element we want to style, which is heading 1. And what we want to do is change the color, because right now it's black. It does not give out a soft look. So we'll use dark gray. Then we change the font size to be slightly bigger, and we need to change the font weight because it's too thick at the moment, so we'll set it to 500 in boldness. Then we want to make sure that the text is aligned to the left. Usually it is usually towards the left by default. Text is aligned to the left by default, but we don't want the browser to decide that. I mean, because it is a default by the browser, we don't want the browser to refine that, because other browsers might have text to be aligned by default towards the center, towards the right, or maybe even towards the center. So we want to define that ourselves. So we want to make sure that the text is aligned towards the left side always. Alright, and now another thing is we want to increase the spacing between the heading and the next section of the product section container. So not the product top container, but between the product top container and the area where the slideshow will appear. So now the first section of the section category container is done. So now let's work on the buttons or the slideshow area. So now let's select the class that we want to edit, and because it is a class, we're using dart in order to select it. And what we want to do is we just, since it is responsible for two elements, it puts two elements together and we want it to be in one row, we'll use the flex layout. And we'll also make sure that the direction is in a row. Another thing is we want to style the two buttons that we have. So remember that whenever we want to add two classes, it is possible to do that, but we need to separate each button that we add with a space. So if I wanted to add another button, I'd have to put in a space and then the class name without adding in the dot, since the dot is just a selector. So now I'm going to select the first class, which is slideshow button, and then we're going to use that, select the class, and so each button, so all of these two buttons should have the same properties. So first of all, we want the background color to be slightly light gray, lighter than what it currently is. But the shade of color is very close, so we'll go with 22237. Another thing is we want to change the border radius, because we don't want it to be rectangular, but we want it to be a circle. So remember, anything that is 50%, if you set the border radius to anything 50% or greater, that turns into a circle. Another thing is we're going to change the width and the height to be around 60 pixels, I think is appropriate. Then we'll use a flexible layout. And we're using a flexible layout in order to make sure that our buttons are positioned to the center, both horizontally centered and both vertically centered. But because right now they're stationed or positioned to the corners of the button. So we're going to use justify content in order to center it horizontally, and then for vertically we'll use place items. Also, another property that can vertically align something, I mean an element vertically, is you can use align items as well, as align items also work. So it's your choice. I just like using placed items. Alright, so now we're going to add in the box shadow to make the buttons look a little more 3D. So we're going to set the X value to 0, the Y value to something small, so 2 pixels, and then how blurry and how big the blurriness for the shadow is. We want to set that to 15 pixels. So now you can see the width of the blurriness. And now we are also going to use the RGBA, and we're going to set the color to something lighter than black, because all box shadows without specifying the color is black. And then one more thing is we want to set the opacity value or the alpha value, and we're going to set it to something light. So 1 would be the darkest, but we want to set it to 0.1. So we want the box shadow to be more subtle rather. But we want it to be obvious that the button is also 3D. Alright, so now we're going to edit the previous button, but only the previous button. We're not going to edit the next button, and that is because the next one is to the right and the previous is to the left. We want to edit the first one so that we can create a spacing between these two buttons. So we're going to use margin right. So we're going to select the class, and we're going to use the property margin right in order to create the spacing towards the right side of the left button. And we're going to set it to something to around 15 pixels, so you can either edit the previous button or the next button, depends on you. Okay, so now we're going to work on the products container, so the next section. So first of all, we want to select the container name. We're going to select it with a dot since it is a class. And what we want to do is, since it is responsible for only the UL element, we're just going to set the whole container to make sure that it has a width of 100%, so it fills up the whole container from left to right. I mean the whole web page from left to right until the padding space that we added before in our main body. And now we're also going to use a flex layout so that we can set and justify any content that we made, and we want to make sure that it leans towards the start, which basically means it needs to move towards the left side. So it's like text align left. So we just want to align all the items towards the left side. Okay, so now we're going to select the container once again. We're going to select the UL unordered list element. And what we're going to do is use the flex layout so that we can have it in one line. So we use flex direction row. So we have it in one row, and we also want to use a flex wrap, and we want to wrap everything. So for example, so basically we want the elements to move to the next line in case it overfills the web page, the width that it has been set to, because it has only been set to 100%, nothing more. Alright, and the last thing we are going to add is list style in order to get rid of any bullet points that there might be, or that there may be. So now the bullet points are removed, and I believe that we don't need to add any more properties. We don't need to add any properties for the list item, but we will for the class. So we're going to select the class, but we're going to select it through the container. So we want to select the name of the container it is in, and then select the card item. And so there are a lot of things that we're going to add, but I think we'll start with adding the background color. So we want the background color of the card to be white, but the image section will actually be blue, very light blue, and then the bottom section will be completely white. But we want to set the whole thing to white first. Then we're going to add a border radius of 10 pixels. So we want to make the corners round. And we're going to set the box shadow. And we want 0 X value, so we don't want it to move to the left nor right. We don't want it to move up or down, but we do want a box shadow just around the element. And we're going to set the RGBA values, so we want it to be 71 once again. And we're going to set the opacity value to 0.1. So now you can see a little bit of a shadowy effect, so the product title looks 3D. Now another thing is we want to make sure that the items, the text items are towards the left side, so we want the title or the name of the product, the price, and the button to be aligned to the left side of the product card. And we're also going to set overflow. We're going to use overflow hidden. So we want anything inside the element, if it overflows, we want it to be hidden. And this is actually going to be a very important element, as now we're going to set the width value to 0 and the height value to 0 as well, so we won't be able to see the products now. So the reason why I'm setting it to 0 is because we're going to use JavaScript in order to load our products. So JavaScript is going to choose which element should go first based, and we're going to do it based on the file name. So for example, we named our elements from 1 to 12, so JavaScript is going to help us to position our elements in order. And then when we click on the slideshow, we want the previous, for example, if we click on next, we want the previous product card or the first product card in the list to go back basically. So we want the width to change to 0, and while it changes to 0, we're going to create a transition effect. So the width should be its full width until we click on next. Then the product card should slowly transition from the current width that it is to 0. So we want the user to see the transition process of the width changing from its full width to 0, not just bang straight away, but we want the transition to be slower, and that creates a smooth transition. But we also want to make sure that the items do not overflow, because as the width of the product card is set to 0, the image, we're not changing the image size, we're not changing the button size or the text size or font size or anything like that. And so I hope that made sense. And now we're going to select the product card once again, and we're going to include the hovering effect. So when we hover around the product, we want it to transform, and we want it to be larger. So when we hover around a product card, it should be larger by 1.1. So the similar value that we used for the product categories. Now, because we're not setting up the JavaScript just yet, we just leave the width and height as it is. So now when we hover around the product card, you can see that it changes. So another thing that we need to add is a transition, because now the change from its normal to a larger size is a little too fast. So we're going to use the transition property, and we're going to set, we want the transition to be in 0.8 seconds, and you'll see the reason why we're enlarged, because we usually set it by 0.3 seconds, but now we're increasing it, and I'm going to show you why in a very few. Alright, so now we're going to head over to our HTML page, because we are done with the product cards container. We're going to add more properties, but that is only when we're going to create the JavaScript properties. So for now, since we've not added the JavaScript properties yet, we'll just set the width and the height to what it's supposed to be, which is 260 pixels, and we want the height to be at around 379 pixels, which I found was appropriate and flows best. So now we're going to work on the image container. So as you can see, the image is not properly sized. So we're going, since it's a class, we'll use a dot in order to select it, and what we want to do is set the background color of the image section. So for the image section, we want the image section to be light blue, whereas the bottom section should be white, should stay white. So for the image section, we're going to keep it at 231, 238, 252. So that is the color, same color that we used for these product categories. We want it to be this light blue. Now another thing is we want to include a padding space. So we want the space to be within the section, and we want to set it to 20 pixels. Then we want the height of the image section to be about 198 pixels, and we want to use a flexible layout so that we can justify the content, and so that we can justify the image, the content being the image, horizontally center and also vertically center. So we use place items, or you could use align items as well. Alright, so now we're going to change the image size, as we still have a problem there. So we're going to select the image through the image container name, and select the image element itself. And what we want to do is we want to set the maximum width to be 100%, and we want the height to be 100%. So there is no question in how tall it should be. It should be 100% always. However, we want the width to change or adjust accordingly. Now, another thing is we want to use the objective property, and we want to make sure that the image is properly positioned inside the container and does not overflow, and it properly fits the container. So object fit contain helps. Now we're going to finally edit the heart button. So we're going to select the class, the container name, which is product image container, so still the same container we're working on, and we're going to select the heart button. Inside the heart button, we're going to add a lot of properties. So first of all, we are going to set the color to white. So we want the button to be a white circle, and then the SVG inside to be maybe slightly dark gray. So we're going to change the color text, because changing the color text can also change the SVG color. So we can change or set the color to the color that we always use for text, which is 64. Now we want to change the border radius, and we want to set it to around 50%. So that will make it or turn it into a circle. So now we can see the circle, but the heart is positioned on the top of the button, but we want it to be towards the center. So we'll use the flexible layout. Then we're going to set it towards the center horizontally with justified content, and also vertically with place items. And then we want to set up the padding, because it looks like there's no space between the SVG and the button itself. So we're going to set the padding. Well, we're not going to add a lot of padding, we're just going to set it to 8 pixels. So now we can see the space between the heart and the button, and I think it's an appropriate amount. And now this is not the last thing, but very close. So we're going to use the cursor property, because when we hover around the button, we want the button to change, and we don't want the button to change, but we want the mouse to change and to turn into a pointer. So we want it to change to the right hand as if it's pointing. So now we can see that change. Alright, so now when we check our product card, we can see that unfortunately the headphones are not really at the center, because the container sees that there are two elements, the headphones and the button. However, we want the image container to identify only one element, and which is of course the image, whereas the button should be ignored and should be placed somewhere at the top corner of the product card. So what we can do is we can use this property called position, and we can set it to absolute, so that the image container section can ignore the button and can recognize that since there's only one element, which is the image, it will center it accordingly. So now we want to, with the position absolute, we want to position it somewhere at the top corner. So for position absolute, it works very differently compared to position relative, because we did use position relative in order to position the count, the red button, and the number. So now what we want to do is keep it to the right corner. So we're going to set the top value to 10 pixels up, and we also want it to be 10 pixels to the right. So now it's at the top right corner, and it works differently than position relative. We needed to, in order to move the span element upwards to the right corner, we needed to use the properties bottom and left. And the reason why was because when we used the bottom property, it meant, and with position relative, it meant that, like for example, if it was a higher value than 0, then that means it's a certain amount of pixels away from the bottom. So for example, if it was 10 pixels, if the bottom property was set to 10 pixels, then that means we were keeping the span element 10 pixels away from the bottom. And likewise for left, we needed to use a higher value than 0 in order to keep it a number of pixels away from the left but towards the right. So that was a little bit confusing, but for position relative, it's much more easier, straightforward, and understandable, plausible. But now we can see that there's a problem. The heart only appears when we hover around the image, but when we stop hovering around the image, or the whole container, it goes away and it disappears. And you might be wondering where it is. So when we scroll up really quickly, we can see a glimpse of that heart on top, and that means that it has gone out of the document flow, so it is no longer part of the document flow. And the reason why is because it does not really have a element nearby that uses the property that uses the position property. So nothing inside the image container nor the product card, neither of them have a position property. So we're going to add that, and we need to use the relative position property so that it knows that it needs to position itself based on the container, based on the image container that we made. So in the image container, which is basically this whole section, we want the heart button to be towards the top right corner. So we need to include the position relative CSS property. So now when we reload, we can see that it appears now, and it does not disappear. Even when we scroll up, we see that the heart button is no longer there because it is positioned here. There's no repeat or anything like that. So now it works. So now we're going to work on the text section. Alright, so now what we want to do is change the color of the heart button, because at the moment the outline is black, but we don't want it to be black. We want it to be a similar color to the dark color we used. So we want to make the heart more soft and appealing. So we're going to use dark gray, just the same color as the text. So in our HTML file, there is a property called stroke. And stroke basically carries, the color that the SVG will have. And however, this will be repeated 72 times because we are going to have 6 categories or 6 sections, and we're always going to produce 12 products per section. So 12 times 6 is 72. So there are going to be 72 copies of this SVG, and we don't want to have to copy the stroke over and over and over. So we're going to set the color in CSS, so we'll get rid of that in our HTML file. And another thing is we also have the fill property. So it basically tells you whether, it basically carries, what kind of color the heart or the SVG will have inside the button. So let's just start by selecting the heart button, and inside the heart button we want to select the SVG. So we're going to include the property stroke, and we want to get the color dark gray. So we'll go with 6.4. Okay, it's not there. So now we can see the heart, and the fill property basically carries, what type of color the SVG will have inside the heart button. So let's say if I used it to set it to red, then it would be red, which will also be used later on when we use JavaScript and we create an effect where if a user clicks on the heart button, the color should turn completely red, including the outline as well. So right now we're going to fill it to nothing, so it should be transparent. And we're also going to remove the fill property in here. So since they're going to change, we're going to set it in our CSS file rather than our HTML file. Alright, so now we're going to work on the paragraph or the price element. So once again, we're going to select the container in order we're going to use a container in order to select the element we want to style. And first of all, we want to set the font color to be 11102. So it is a color that is lighter than the ones we currently use. Another thing is we want the font size to be slightly smaller than the heading, so we'll set it to 1 pixel less than the first heading we used. And we also want to set the font weight to be about 400, so thinner than the heading. And last but not least, since there is a button that we're going to add beneath this element, we're going to add some margin spacing below it, and we're going to set it to 8 pixels. So now we can see our product card starting to come to life. And now the last thing we're going to edit is the blue button. So now what we want to do is set up the padding space, the font size, and a few other properties. So we're going to select the button by using the container, and we're going to select the blue button that we used. And we're going to set the padding space to 8 pixels and 16 pixels. So 8 being the y value and 16 being the x value. So I want it to be wider than taller. All I'm going to do is change the border radius to be of 5 pixels, so something not too big or not too round. Then we want to set the font size to 15, around 15 pixels. And as we hover around the object, we want the mouse to change into a pointer, so the white hand, and it does not currently do that, so we're going to use the cursor property and we're going to set it to pointer, and that's all. So now when we hover around our button, it changes the cursor changes to the pointer, and the hovering effect works based on the blue button that we used earlier over here. Alright, so now if you think the letter card looks good as it is, then you can ignore this part. However, what we want to do is now move all of our items towards the left side. So in order to do that, we're going to scroll up back to our product card, and we're going to position this to be towards the left side. So I think it looks good like this, but please do comment down below if you think it looks better in the center, or if they should be positioned towards the left side. Alright, so now it seems like everything is set. However, I feel like these arrows are a little too thin, and these are the ones that we got from Bootstrap. So over here, we got it from Bootstrap. So instead, let's go with the SVG repo, which also provides thicker SVGs, just like the one for the heart. We found the Bootstrap usually gives thin ones, but SVG repo gives thick ones. So let's go back to SVG repo. And here we can just type in chevron, as that's the name of the arrow that we want. So we want the first, next, and we also want the previous one, which should be here. So now let's get the SVG by clicking on edit vector, and we can copy the SVG and then paste it in here. And since we're not going to be using JavaScript to change the color or anything like that, we can just set the color, the stroke color, in the HTML file. So all we need to do is search for stroke right here, and we'll change it to become dark gray. So now we can check and see that the SVG is now thicker. However, it is too big or too large. So we're also going to change the width to become 30 pixels, so that's much smaller, and the height as well. Alright, so now that seems great, and it does look more aesthetic compared to this type of arrow. It does look more modern and much more appealing to the eye. So now let's get the right chevron, and we'll paste it in here. And once again, since we're not using CSS to change the color of the SVG, we'll just change the color in here, and we'll change it to become 64, which gives us dark gray. And we also need to change the width and the height to 30 pixels as well. Alright, so now we're done with creating the full product section. Now we're going to work on adding all of the other products, and we're going to work on the slideshow itself. So first of all, we want to create 12 items in the all electronics section. So what we're going to do is copy this full product card 11 more times to make it 12 product cards in this section. Alright, so now they all look very identical, so we're going to change all of the images. We're also going to change the title names as well as the pricing names. Alright, and now we are at the end of part 4. If you like this video, hit the thumbs up button, comment down below, and subscribe to Code Harvest. Thank you so much for watching, and see you in part 5 of the eLife web series.